Hello everyone and welcome to Chapter 9 of the eggPlant Performance tutorial series. In this chapter we're going to have our first look at Test Controller. So Test Controller is the second of the three core components of eggPlant Performance, and it is the component you would use to not only run your tests, but also to monitor them as they're running. So you have real-time information, real-time feedback about what your test is getting up to, as far as things like number of virtual users that are running, your transaction rates, your response times, obviously, and it's also where you would be able to see information that your virtual users might be logging as they execute. So in the last chapter, we got to the point of debugging a script in the IDE. So we were using Visual Studio to run the test. When you do that, you are only able to run a single virtual user, which is why it's only really for debug purposes. As soon as you want to run multiple virtual users, that's when you would use Test Controller. So here's my basic test. Currently it's just set to run a single user. We're running the basic workflow, which is this guy over here. In my basic workflow, I've defined two scripts that I want to run initially. I haven't included any scripts that would be repeatedly executed with each iteration. So this is actually an incomplete workflow. You would typically have a script in the repeated block, basically because you'd want to be able to maintain the load that you're generating. With this setup, we're only going to run through the initial and login once, and then going to log out once at the end of the test. So perhaps one of the first things we should do is to modify this workflow so that instead we'll have these scripts in the repeated block, so that we're repeatedly going to browse to the home page, log in and log out. So I'm just going to do that now. I'll just remove all of these scripts from initial and final now. The order is still important, so I do want to browse to the home page before I then execute the login step, and likewise for the logout as well. So that's it, that's all I needed to do. By the way, I did just click this floppy disk icon up here. That is to indicate that I want to save the changes that I've just made. That's important because unless I press that save button, Test Controller will see the previous settings as opposed to the latest ones that I've just applied. So whenever you make a change, you may notice this little asterisk up here on Studio's title bar. That indicates that there's an unsaved change here, and so if I want to actually commit that change or have that change manifest in Test Controller, I do need to explicitly save the project here. And the shortcut to do that is Control S. I'm almost ready to run the test, but there is one little change I need to make. So when I originally recorded these scripts, the host or the URL that I was browsing to was simply nopcommerce. That's now no longer the case. I've migrated it away from this location so that it is instead stored on our website. So I need to update the URL for these scripts. But rather than hard code that change into these scripts, because that wouldn't be recommended, you wouldn't be able to use generation rules because they will more than likely overwrite those changes. The preferred way of modifying something like the IP endpoint is by actually just creating a value associated with this key here. So getString is going to look for this key. If it exists, it'll use whatever value is associated with that key. It's a simple key equals value pair. But if that key doesn't exist at all, or there's no values associated with that key, then it'll instead, getString here will return nopcommerce, and so that's currently how this URL is being constructed. It's just using the default parameter, which is what was used in the original recording. But basically this statement here is already set up to be parameterized through the use of getString. So all I need to do is create this key and assign some new data to it, which will override using the nopcommerce value here. So I've just copied that key name onto my clipboard. Now I could create a data source that contains that key equals value mapping, and there's actually a better place for something like this. So the data that we're adding to this test needs to be available to all of the virtual users, and so it makes sense to store it at the test level. So that's what the test level data tab is for here. If I click that, there's basically two places where I can add data. One of them is where we've already added the credentials table that contains a list of usernames and passwords that the virtual users will use. But there's also this inline data dictionary where I can add just some simple key equals value pairs, which is exactly what we want to do. So I press the green add button there. I just paste in my key. It is this nopcommerce host, and now I can basically say, what the URL should be that my users should browse to, or what the base URL should be. And in this case, it is just nopcommerce.testplant.com. There we go. That's pretty much it. Okay, I think I'm ready to run the test now, so I just need to right-click and open test in test controller. This will cause test controller to eventually show up, and it'll also have loaded that test that we were wanting to run. So you can launch test controller just on its own without it being in the context of a test, but usually you will want to load a test when you launch test controller as well. So that's what's happened now. When you have just a single virtual user in the test, you'll likely see a different layout than if you were to run, for example, 10 or more virtual users. And so, when you're trying to run a test with few virtual users, chances are you're still debugging your script. You're not actually running a load test, and so the UI is modified to make it easier to debug your script. So the default view here is that we show the event log, which is the same event log that appeared when we were running this script through Visual Studio. So it'll basically detail what the virtual user is getting up to as we're running the test. There is, of course, plenty more data available. In fact, all of the things that you can put onto the dashboard here on the right is available in this pane over here. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of information that we can add to this. But for now, because we're just running a single virtual user and it's only going to run one iteration, most of these other charts aren't going to be particularly interesting. So I'm just going to leave that as is for now. At the top left here, we have the green play button. That is what allows you to start the test. So when you press that, we'll perform a bunch of pre-test checks to ensure that the environment is set up and good to go. So we're going to check that the injector configuration is valid. In this case, that's passed. Excuse me. We'll also check whether or not the injector is actually running. In the case of localhost, it is in fact not running yet, and that's because it's started automatically whenever you start a test. So you don't have to worry about manually starting up injectors or anything when you're using the localhost injector. We'll perform a license check. We'll also check to see whether or not the code has been compiled. So if you've made code changes and you haven't hit the compile button or the build button up here, then this dialog will complain and it won't actually let you start the test. So it's important to make sure that whenever you make code changes, that you also then run a compile. That's pretty much it. You can choose to put the test runs in a particular series, and so that's just logically grouping test runs together. I've already done a few runs here, so I'm just going to put this next test run into the same series as these other test runs down here. Hitting the start button then kicks off the test. We'll start up an engine process. That's what's responsible for actually running the test. The virtual user is already started, it's already logged in, and it's already done the logout. It's run very quickly. There's not much in the way of think times in this test. The dialog here has popped up to let us know that the test run is finished, and we get the options to either keep this test run on the hard drive or to delete it. So if this was just a debug run, you don't necessarily need any of this information going forward, then you can just freely delete that test run. You can even add some notes. These notes will display in Analyzer then, the third and final component. It'll allow you to add notes to say, oh, I was testing this on version XYZ, whatever it may be. If you check this box to flag the test run for analysis, then this test run will appear more prominently in the list of all the test runs that you've completed, so it's easier to find it to then be able to analyze it further. Okay, that's pretty much it. So that was the first test run in Test Controller. We have the ability to open the weblog over here from the cog icon. And so these are the two windows that you saw popping up when we were running this test in Visual Studio. Now, of course, we want to run this with multiple virtual users. So this was just a single virtual user, not too interesting. Let's make it more interesting and run multiple virtual users. So right now, if I just have a look at my credentials table, I only have one test account defined here, so I probably want to add some more. So I'll just go ahead and do that now. I'm not actually sure how many test accounts I have currently, but I'm going to go ahead and put some more in here anyway, just in case I've got more configured, and we'll be able to log in with each of these accounts. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's go ahead and add 2 more. So we'll try and run up to 10 virtual users and see what that gives us. I'm expecting some of them to fail purely because these accounts might not all exist on the site, in which case we'll probably want to register them at some point. I go back into my test, and so instead of running a single virtual user, I want to run 10, so I can double click this virtual user group to see the group settings, and I just change number of users here to 10. And that's pretty much it. Again, there's an asterisk on my title bar here indicating that I've changed something in the test, and in order for Test Controller to be able to pick that up, I do need to hit the floppy disk to save that change. And as soon as I've done that, Test Controller will have picked that up. You see it now says 10 pending here instead of 1, and so this is now good to go with 10 virtual users. Now is probably a good time to bring some other bits of information onto the display. So this one here, virtual user groups, if I just put that at the top, this will give us a high-level overview of our virtual user group here, basic users. We'll be able to see when they start running, when they've completed, if any are in error or other statuses. So that gives a nice little summary there. There's another summary within the virtual user group that's actually very similar to the one we see up in the top left. So it's not really telling us much new, so I'm just going to close that one again. A virtual users table is a bit more detailed than the virtual user groups view, so we'll put that one in there. We'll be able to see the status of the virtual users, and there's also a quick link to view the virtual users weblog, at least the one for any virtual user that has been configured to collect the weblog, which by default is 1 in every 100 virtual users. It's something you can change in your test as well. And then in the virtual users folder below here, this is where we have all of the virtual users event logs. So it's going to be a bit much to display all of them on a single view, but we can at least put some more on there in any case. Let's go with 4 and move this about a bit. So perhaps something like this will do. Just drag these around. There we go. So by the way, this view is now persisted for this test. So once you modify the dashboard, we do remember the settings that you've applied. And that should be good to go. So we should see a lot of stuff going on here. Maybe we will also want to have a look at our transaction response times. So I'm just going to bring that one up here as well. I'll squeeze that one in there. Something like that. Okay, I think we're good to go. Let's see how well this runs now. So hit the play button again. All the pre-test checks passed, so I can straight away hit the start button, and off we go. Okay, we've already got virtual users running and completing. I haven't actually set this test to iterate, and so these users will just go into the completed state and do no more. So in terms of maintaining load on the system, I'm not really doing that at the moment. They're all just going to run through once, and there we go, the test is finished again. So yeah, not too great. We should probably try and keep this running for a while, just so we can see more data appearing on the dashboard. So I'll just go back in here again, open the virtual user group settings. This time it's a runtime setting that we want to change. So instead of just running a single iteration, I'm going to execute this test over a period of time. So this is now going to run for 30 minutes with these settings. That'll do. Perhaps I want to increase the pauses. No, it's okay. I'll leave it as is for now. Save the change. Go back into test controller. That's picked up the change and reset the UI. We can hit F5 as well in order to bring up the test start dialog here. Off we go again. So this time we should see the iteration count here increase as our virtual users run. There we go. So the first and second virtual user are already into the third iteration now, so they're running pretty quickly. It's probably putting a fair amount of load on the system. It's not the most powerful web server in the world, so we'll see how it copes with that. We are seeing some warnings come through, slightly unexpected, but it looks like there was a page title that was not what we were expecting it to be, and it looks like it's intermittent even. I'm not seeing it appear all the time. Let's see if I can find an example of that warning message. This virtual user doesn't seem to have experienced it. Let's see if we can find an example of it. Let's see. Okay, so all of the virtual users apart from the first and second are experiencing warnings. So I wasn't going to find it in here, but I should see some message in here. Okay, so we're expecting to see the HTML title your store, but we're still looking at the login. So for me, that leads me to suspect that we haven't actually managed to log these guys in, despite the successfully logged in message there. So I guess I need to change my rule. If we're failing to log in as a user, perhaps that username is displayed on the page in the form of unable to log in with with email03@test.com, and so my verification check to ensure I logged in was just looking for that text. It's probably not good enough, so we'll need to go back and modify that as well. But for now, we're still putting load on the system. We're not quite logging in with most of the users here, so it's far from an ideal test. It's not doing what it's meant to be doing. Typically you don't really want to see any warnings or errors happen at all. And they're usually a sign that something isn't quite going as expected. So it's always a good idea to investigate warnings. And don't be fooled by the name warnings either. In most cases, they're about as serious, if you like, as errors. But we can see our response times here for our different transactions that we are executing. They're all pretty quick, so the site is performing pretty well despite being bombarded by 10 virtual users. Now I have a few options when it comes to actually stopping this test manually. So this was set to run for 30 minutes, but I'll probably stop the test early just so we can see, so that we can run more tests. So the first button up here, the blue square, that will stop the virtual user from running after the current iteration. So it's a very graceful way of ending a test. If you don't want to stick around for that, in some cases your iteration might actually take several minutes to complete. So if you really want to stop a test earlier than that, then you can use the next stop button along, which will indicate that the virtual user should stop immediately. That should in most cases end the test fairly abruptly, but if you needed an even more abrupt termination of the test, then you can abort the test with the far right button here. And that'll essentially kill the process that's responsible for generating the load. So that is the quickest way of ending a test. With any of the options, your test results aren't going to be affected. Aborting a test isn't suddenly going to destroy the data that was collected. You can still import that test run and analyze and view all of the results. These other options here, next to the stop buttons, are for adding and removing virtual users from the running test. So you do have dynamic control over how many virtual users should be running. So there's actually nothing stopping me from suddenly doubling the load by adding another 10 virtual users here. We should see that reflected on the virtual user concurrency chart. Let's see if I can find where that is. Let's see. Oh, of course, it's all the way over here. So this is now showing us a virtual user concurrency. I'm just going to remove a couple of those event logs there. So we can see that in the beginning we were running just 10 virtual users, and now I've added another 10, so we're total running 20 virtual users at the moment. And so it'll be interesting to see if that affects the response times. It has indeed. We've now got higher response times for the logout and well, in fact, pretty much all of the transactions that we're executing. So clearly our virtual users are having an impact on the web server. Let's see, we can also change the pause factor, and so when you define pause times in your test in the virtual user group, runtime settings, these pauses here, you're basically able to modify this value here, the script pause factor. So 100% script pause means it's going to use exactly the settings defined here. And so if I suddenly put 200% here, then I would expect all of my pauses to be twice as long. So you can use that to modify the think time dynamically, essentially. And as it says there, setting this to 0% means that there won't be any script pauses at all. So if I want to suddenly simulate these virtual users hammering the site as quickly as they could, then I would just set this pause factor to 0. I'm just going to leave that as is for now. I'm not too interested in completely destroying the server, so I'll just leave that as is. The test has been running for, let's see, for about almost 7 minutes now. So on the 7 mark, I'm just going to tell it to gracefully end. So we should see as soon as our virtual users have done their logout script from this point on, they'll just not continue iterating. There we go, it's already happened. The test is now finished. If you wanted to look at previous test runs, you can do that here as well. So any test runs that you've completed will appear in this list over here. And you can view information for that test in Test Controller as well as Analyzer. If you view any of this stuff in Test Controller, it'll actually open it into a separate tab so as not to mix with your live dashboard. So this is useful for just getting some idea of how the test fared, but looking at test results is what Analyzer's designed to do, and so Analyzer is probably the better place to deep dive into the results of your tests. That's it for now. Stay tuned for the next chapter where we'll continue fleshing out this performance test against an upcomers website. Thanks for watching.